Okay, hello, amazing artists. It's Kelly Folsom here, and I want to welcome you back to our Art Life Conversations podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about tips for traveling to Paris, especially traveling to Paris alone as a female. If you're going to Paris for the first time, my very first trip there was by myself. I was 32 years old, and I've heard from a lot of other women that oh my gosh, I can't believe you went there by yourself. That's super scary. Yes, I mean, so new things are scary, right? And but sometimes there are things that are so worth facing our fears and doing something, even if that means we have to do it alone. Now, I will say there's really no reason for you to have to do it alone. There's so many ways that you can join other groups, especially these days. Whenever I went was in 2000, summer of 2011, and I wasn't as active online. I didn't really know about a lot of other opportunities, but there's all kinds of ways that you can join in with other groups. If you're an artist, there's all kinds of art workshops, art retreats, different things like that that you can join in on. Of course, nowadays there's also like the river cruises and things like that. I'm not a big fan of cruises personally, and I wouldn't really recommend that for Paris anyway, because you want to be like on the ground exploring the city. There's so much to do in the city of Paris. Um, but some things are worth taking that chance on, taking that risk on. If you are looking to go with a group of women, then I do have a few spots left in my Paris retreat, which is we're going to be there October 27th through the 31st. This is really more of an artistic cultural retreat. So it's not going to be like your typical art workshop. I don't think whenever you're in Paris, you want to be painting your ass off and working your ass off all day. Like, no, you want to be experiencing Paris, especially the artwork in Paris. You want to be going to the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, the l'Orangerie, Monet's Giverny. You want you want to see the Eiffel Tower, right? You want to see all of this amazing artwork, even the Petit Palais. There's all kinds of smaller museums there too, in Paris. You also want to be taking photographs and getting reference images, perhaps to come back and create from, to make paintings from, right? Or to do your watercolors or your sketches or illustrations from. So I just feel like to go to Paris and paint from morning, spend your whole day painting in a studio in Paris, to me is like a huge wasted opportunity. So anyways, just throwing that out there. And again, I have a few spots left. We're going to be doing all of those incredible things. We will also have some sketching breaks in some of my favorite areas, like the Tuileries Garden, other things. So we'll balance out, looking at the museum with lots of other fun stuff as well, going to wonderful, wonderful dinners, which to me, French food is the absolute best. And no, I don't eat snails. I don't do the escargot thing. I don't do the tartare thing. But gosh, there's so much other French food besides that. I think a lot of times there's kind of stereotypes about Paris and the French and French food that are just that. They're just stereotypes, and they're kind of, yeah, they're not the full story about France and the full experience about France. So we're going to dive into that today. I have the link there for you if you're interested in joining us. Like I say, I just opened this up and we just have a few spots left. Okay, so where to stay in Paris? As an artist, my favorite arrondissements to stay in would be in Saint Germain, or the first arrondissement, which is right next to the Louvre. Because you are going to be on your feet a lot, you will be walking a lot. It's not like things are super far away from each other. Like the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, I think, is about a 15-minute walk from each other. But you're also walking around in the museums, and so I just find that those two arrondissements are the closest and the most convenient for the majority of the museums. You can hit, the Petit Palais, the l'Orangerie, which has the, all of Monet's beautiful water lily paintings, the Louvre, and the Musée d'Orsay, all there kind of in one section within 20-minute walks of each other. And of course, where else better to walk in Paris than along the Seine? There's so many amazing hotels. I've heard of people saying, oh, I'm going to stay in an Airbnb, and I'm like, oh, why? There's so many incredible affordable hotels in Paris. I think that's another kind of misconception about Paris and misunderstanding, is like everything's so expensive. And quite frankly, some of those hotels are just as expensive, just as affordable as the Marriott I just stayed in Glendale, California, which was like $250 a night. So you can actually get a really reasonable, beautiful hotel, even in those more touristy, high tourist areas like the first arrondissement or the Saint Germain. The difference between those, I would say the first is more on the touristy side, and I don't think the restaurants are quite as good, at least the ones closer to the Louvre there, as the restaurants in Saint Germain. Some of my favorite restaurants are in Saint Germain, and Saint Germain is kind of more it feels more like you're like in a living neighborhood in Paris with these little windy streets. And however, Saint Germain is going to be a further walk to some of the things that we're going to be doing. So I am recommending the first arrondissement for those artists who are joining me on the retreat. So if you go further out, I know some people will try to save a lot of money on their accommodations and stay, way out in another arrondissement, like the 17th or something like that. And from what I've heard, that's not quite as great of an experience. So I just recommend staying close to the area where you want to go visit. And maybe it is going to cost you a few $100 extra. I don't know. I feel like the hotels there are very, comparable in price. Okay, so I would say the only other arrondissement I can speak for that I've actually stayed in has been the Latin Quarter. And I loved that too. I will say it didn't seem like at least back in 2011, it didn't seem like there was as many restaurants available there. And also, if you do arrive in the afternoon, if you're not in kind of a high tourist area, you may have a hard time finding something to eat, because the restaurants, in those kind of more traditional neighborhoods, I guess, I don't know how to say it, less touristy, I guess, they have different hours for the restaurants and things. But the Latin Quarter was also an amazing place to stay. It was a little more affordable, a little further out, but still very, very safe, still within, like I said on the last podcast, probably 40-minute walk to the Louvre and things like that. Okay, so those would be I can only speak for the places that I've stayed in, and those are the 3 arrondissements I've stayed in. And I think pretty much probably a lot of things that are close, by the Seine there, over by the Eiffel Tower, I think would be a really nice area to stay in. Champs-Élysées, or however you say that. I'm from Oklahoma. I can't speak a lick of French. Okay, I do the best I can. But that area I think is a nice place to stay. But so I think pretty much any of those arrondissements that are close to the Seine River on either bank. I have heard that what is the name of the one? Anyways, there's one that I think it's where like the Moulin Rouge, close to like Moulin Rouge and things like that. That is, I've heard. I don't know. I can't speak to this for sure, but I've heard that it's a little more rambunctious and loud, and maybe kind of more of like a party, younger scene, or maybe kind of like a party scene. But I've never stayed there. So my recommendations are Saint Germain, the First, or if you want to go further out, somewhere like the Latin Quarter or one of the other two. We will be staying in the First, Arrondissement, in the retreat that I'm leading. So how long to stay? Oh my gosh, as long as you can, really. As long as you can afford to stay, like you're already, the only regrets I have about visiting Paris is like not being able to stay longer. And that's why this year I'm staying, for almost 3 months. My first trip there, I had such limited funds. I could only stay for 5 days in Paris. And it's just not long enough, I don't think, especially for an artist. So the longer you can stay, you're already paying the money to fly over there. The longer you can stay, I think the better, so also so that you don't feel so rushed and you can really just soak in and take in Paris and like go have some fun shopping in Paris, take an empty suitcase with you, go to the famous flea markets, things like that. But I would say, 5 days, I would say would be minimum. You can't really do a whole lot in under 5 days. That's why my retreat is 5 days long minimum. And then, I'm hoping that the people who come will add on extra time for themselves. Okay. Things to do, visit, or any tips on that. Of course, all of the museums that you're interested in hitting. This year actually will be my first year going to Giverny because I'm going to be there for longer. And so that is like a day trip outside of Paris that you can easily get tickets for that. So I recommend doing all of those. In the past, I used to do a museum pass, which was awesome. That's what I did on my first trip there. So I do recommend that you get all of your tickets to things like that in advance. And of course, the artists who are coming with me, I will be handling that for them. I'll be, that's included in their retreat is admissions to the museums, and I'll be handling the purchase and reservation of those tickets. But I do recommend getting your tickets in advance, especially if you're going at a high tourist season like the summer. The summer is usually the most touristy. I started going at the end of August, 1st of September. And, August is also their, kind of vacation month in France. So sometimes if you're there in August, a lot of restaurants, even in the higher tourist areas, will still not be open because they're on vacation. They all take off for the month of August. Now, obviously, the Louvre and things like that would still be open. But you just want to keep that in mind. So I started going like 1st of September for my last two trips, which was much quieter, less crowded. But even still, you still want to buy your tickets in advance so that you're not stuck in a line. My first year there, the lines were like so long to get into the Louvre and other things. So you just want to try to save yourself that hassle. If you can do a skip the line kind of ticket or something like that, that's the best case scenario. Now, going into the Louvre, you are also going to have to, at least I know in particular for the Louvre, I'm not sure about the other museums. They are going to have you go through security, right? Like much like going through airport security, except for you get to keep your shoes on and all that. But I would recommend not taking a backpack, just doing like a crossbody bag type of thing, or maybe even a fanny pack or something, or a purse. But, anything that's too big, they're going to have to really, check that pretty much everywhere that you go. Plus, it's just going to be heavy and weigh you down. And why do you need a big backpack whenever you're at the Louvre? I don't understand that personally. You just don't need that much, right? Like you need your phone, your wallet, you need, your sketchbook and something to write with perhaps. And that's, maybe some touch up lipstick if you're a girl. But there's just not a whole lot that you should need. I always have a little travel bottle of Advil with me too in my bag. Okay, so but other than that, anything you want to do in Paris is so great. You know, go have dinner at the Eiffel Tower. It's so easy to make reservations, and in fact, for dinner and things like that, especially nowadays. If you want to beat the crowd, go early. Us Americans like to eat early. Usually, you can go as early as 7, maybe 6:30, and you'll probably be one of the fewest people there. You know, you usually in French restaurants, things are tight. So tables are sat quite close together, which is very different from America. And that can make people uncomfortable sometimes, it's a little awkward. Some restaurants are even tighter than others. So just expect that. You know, that's just the way that it is. Like they have limited space. But wherever you're staying, like with your hotel, you can also ask them for recommendations and if you're staying at a good hotel, like trust your hotel concierge. They are awesome. They want to do a good job. I mean, the thing of it is like they really, really want you to have a great experience. So this whole idea of like the French being rude and stuff like that, I think is just total baloney. Now, they do have traditions and customs that are different from ours, like the way that they wait tables is totally different from the way that Americans, waitresses and waiters wait tables here. Like they're not going to chat you up. They're not there to be your best friend. They are not going to be checking on you every 5 minutes. They are, however, they will always know when you need something. And that always amazes me. Like before I even need something, it's like they know and they come and do it. I've had, you know, the wait staff there make custom croissants for me, even though they were sold out of croissants at the little brasserie in Saint Germain. And it was the best croissant I've ever had in my whole life. So frankly, I think the French are incredibly kind. You know, there have been a couple of, you know, more touristy type of restaurants that I've gone to where they're a little less friendly, they're a little less attentive. So just be mindful of, you know, where you're going. I think sometimes they can get a little tired of, you know, Americans coming in and, you know, maybe not behaving in the way that they're used to. On that note, I would say you always say bonjour everywhere, every shop, every restaurant you go into, you say bonjour every time, you know, otherwise it's like you are being rude. So if you go in and you don't say bonjour and you get kind of like this cold shoulder treatment, that's why, you know. So do a little bit of research before you go and do your best. Even that being said, like my first trip there, I really did not know very much about anything about the French culture. I was not saying bonjour because I was embarrassed, because I felt like I said it stupid. But then I finally learned that, you know, it was offensive to them for me not to say bonjour. I wasn't saying merci because I was embarrassed, right? So you kind of have to get over your embarrassment and just do the best that you can in terms of saying, you know, nicety, you know, just polite, respectful things like bonjour, merci, which is thank you, of course. I think everybody knows that. And then that brings us to the topic of speaking French. Do you need to speak French? I don't speak a lick of French, very, very little French. And the little French I speak is not good at all. Um, and so, especially in these kinds of areas now, you know, probably the more you go on the outskirts, outside of like around the Seine there and around the main touristy areas, you know, I've heard that there's less and less people that do speak English, or you will run into people who don't speak English. But at the same time, it's like, this is 2024, right? You've got Google Translate, you've got so many ways to communicate now. You really should not run into any issues with that. I've never had any issues with that. And as a tourist and just you're traveling there for pleasure, It's not like you're having, intense conversations with anybody. You're either ordering food or asking where the restroom is, or maybe asking for directions at that. So you really don't need to know French for that, especially in those main touristy areas. Is it safe? Yes, I have never once felt unsafe in Paris. The only time that it even came close to feeling uncomfortable was like my first trip there. I went to put my ATM in the ATM machine in the Latin Quarter, and for some reason it sucked up my ATM card, my credit card, and would not give it back to me. And I had to wait for the bank to open. And even then I did not have to speak French. And this was like before I didn't have an iPhone. I didn't have any way to translate. And there was enough people there that spoke English, and they were so kind, and they helped me, and I ended up getting on the phone with Bank of America. But I had to travel across town, I think to like the 17th arrondissement, or somewhere like way, way, way across the city of Paris on the metro. And that was probably the only time, that I felt uncomfortable. And I think it was mostly that, I knew that I didn't have any idea about where I was going or how to navigate or anything like that. Um, but there wasn't really any reason for me to necessarily feel unsafe, but I think it was just the nature of the situation. Otherwise, I've never felt unsafe. Obviously, what I have learned about every major European city that I've traveled to is that you will have things like you will have people, begging for money. And in Paris, you will see more of that whenever you take your taxi from the airport to your hotel. You'll see a lot more kind of immigrants on the street, things like that. And that's going to be more like on the outskirts, and you're not really going to have any kind of interaction with them. So there are things like that that you might see that are kind of like unusual for you to see. Now, of course, I live in Denver, Colorado, and our homeless population here is so crazy, high, with so many homeless people here in downtown. My studio was in downtown Denver. And so frankly, to me, I'm like, there's no difference between, seeing that in downtown Denver and seeing it, on the outskirts of Paris. I will say around the Louvre and things like that, you don't really have to worry about hardly anything. I know I've had some people say, well, watch out for pickpockets. I've never encountered any kind of pickpockets. I encountered more scams, attempts at scams whenever I was in Italy, actually, than in Paris. I think, there in the first in Saint Germain and all of those kind of more popular tourist areas, the police there, the French police, are actually very active. And then you have the military, the French military, which is over by the Eiffel Tower. So you will actually see sometimes the military walking around, in their uniforms and berets and their guns, which that kind of unnerves me because I'm just not used to seeing, uniformed men walking around with guns. And I thought, what is going on? But they're just like doing their normal, kind of run through. So the police tend to like keep things cleaned up in that area. You'll have, like people, sometimes beggars, begging for money on occasion. And even that, you won't see a ton of that, but it will be there sometimes. Or like immigrants who are trying to sell souvenirs, out in front of the Louvre, things like that. But I will say I've never had anyone trying to run a scam on me in Paris like I have in Italy. I have experienced that in Italy before. And the scams are pretty generic, pretty basic, and most of the time you know what's happening, and you can either choose to give them a couple euro and walk off, or you can just walk off. Let's see what else. We already talked about, are the French rude? what to pack, I would just say you're going to be on your feet a lot. So packing comfortable shoes, check the weather for that time of year, see if you need like an umbrella or do you need a sun hat because it's going to be hot. Just basic things like that. I would say the most important thing is going to be comfortable shoes. Um, you don't really need to pack a ton of clothing, just enough, to last you through your trip. I would say, packing something nice to go out if you're going to go out for dinners like we will on the retreat. You don't want to go out to dinner like in a graphic t-shirt and ripped jeans. You want to look nice if you're going to go out to a nice restaurant in Paris. Otherwise, I've seen pretty much everything in terms of tourists and how tourists are dressed, and down from ripped jeans and a Simpsons t-shirt or something, to a huge backpack. So it's not like they're going to turn people away, from the museums, for dressing like that. I don't know. I think I've even seen, I don't know about flip flops, but I think I've even seen people wearing shoes like that. So you can really wear what you want to. I would just say you don't need to be, necessarily dressed up like you're going to the grand ball, every night. And definitely wear comfortable shoes. And then just anything else like, sunglasses and hat if it's sunny outside, stuff like that. I always, like I say, I always take my Advil with me just because, I don't really want to go and I don't need to go stop into a pharmacy if I bring the things with me. I pretty much always pack things for like stomach issues just in case. That's for any trip. I mean, that's even if I go to LA because my stomach gets upset whenever I travel. Um, and I take that with me on every trip. So any kind of medications, things like that. I like to just take what I'm used to taking with me. Instead of, having to find something there in that country. And I don't think that they have, Advil per se there. You want to, what I learned from my first trip with the ATM card situation is, of course, you want to have multiple credit cards available, at least a couple different credit cards available. I was, young and didn't have a lot of credit cards. And so you want to make sure you have a couple of different forms of payment. Pretty much nowadays, everything is cashless. And I would still recommend taking, ordering some euro from your bank, before you go and just taking a little bit of euro. I don't do this anymore, but my first trip there, I wore a money belt, because I just wasn't sure. So ladies, you can get a very thin money belt, which will hold your extra cash, your ID, things like that, underneath if you're looking on YouTube, underneath your pants. It's kind of like a little fanny pack. I don't mess with things like what is it, like the purses you can't cut through, stuff like that. I don't really mess with anything like that. It's just not that dangerous of a city. But the first year I was there, I did use a money belt. I do recommend that you photocopy everything. You photocopy all of your passport. You make photocopies of your credit cards, things like that. You just set yourself up, for success before you go, on any kind of European travel or any kind of international travel. You just want to have all of those ducks in a row. And then, of course, anything else or digital, take digital images of it as well to have, backup information in your phone, anything like that, just to have backup information on your financial stuff. Um, I think that's pretty much it. I would say the biggest thing for me that uses my mind the most is, I always pre-book, my hotel and things like that in advance. The other biggest thing is I pre-book my airport transport, at least from the airport to the hotel. That's the most important part for me. And I do that in New York City too. because I really don't like having to try to get a Lyft or an Uber or try to figure out who's a real taxi and who's a scammer, kind of thing. So I pretty much always book a car, a private car to come pick me up. And I know this sounds like super fancy, but honestly, it's €100, right? It's like, I think my last car I booked for Monty and I was €100 to be there at the airport. They were there waiting for us with a sign on our sign with our name on it. It was so easy. It was such a nice, comfortable, relaxing car ride in, and especially after you're flying for like 8 hours or however long you're flying. To me, this is so well worth the money. And listen, I am not rich by any means, but there are some things that are not worth skimping and saving on. And I even heard from an art student that I teach online that, they had a negative experience with one of these taxis that wasn't like a real legit taxi. And they ended up trying to like basically ask them for like 200, €300 or something. And that's absurd. A taxi, like a real legit taxi, which should be at the taxi stands. And I can't remember all the markers. You would have to look, you need to look that up, but there's identifiable markers for them. But usually those are going to cost you probably about half of what I paid for the private car, maybe anywhere from 50 to 70 euro instead of 100. Now, this was a few years ago, so I don't know what it's going to be at now. So now for the transport from the hotel or wherever you're staying, that's also why I recommend working with a hotel too. If you can afford to stay at a hotel, honestly, I feel like Airbnbs are just as expensive in Paris as hotels. So if it were me, I would go for a hotel. But for that, I always just arrange with the hotel they book a taxi for me, just like a regular taxi, to take me back to the airport. I just find that doing that just makes me not worry about my transportation situation and how I'm going to get all the way from, the airport down to the area that I'm staying in. So, and on that note, obviously if you're a female, traveling alone, you just want to take your normal precautions that you would take in any city, any larger city in the United States or just in general, right? You just want to be careful being alone at night by yourself, just being alert about where you are and what you're doing, who you're talking with. Just general common sense things if you're traveling alone as a female. Okay. All right, everybody. And I don't, like I say, there's really no reason for you to be traveling alone as a female, but necessarily, unless you just want to, which is reason enough. All right. So I hope that this has been helpful, going over if you're thinking about either, obviously some of this is really going to be taken care of for you if you're joining me on the retreat. But if you're not joining me on the retreat and you want to go with a few friends to Paris, or if you want to set up your first trip there with your partner or, even by yourself, hopefully this has been helpful to you, kind of give you some idea and some of my experience staying there. Really the benefits of going there far outweigh any teeny tiny little, cultural differences or, inconveniences, that's for sure. Okay. All right. I'm wishing you all a happy painting, and I will talk to you at the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and send me a message if you have any questions. You can email me at info@artlifewithkelly with an I.com if you have any questions that you would like me to cover on this podcast or any questions about the Paris retreat. Okay, bye for now.